And just like that, the moment you believed it was too late begins to dissolve, not with thunder, not with noise, but with the subtle tremble of recognition, like a dream remembering itself. The past, once hardened like stone, softens beneath the warmth of your awareness. It is not fixed, it is not over, it is not outside of you. This is the secret the world forgets, but one that waits patiently within you, humming like a forgotten hymn. You can rewrite it, you can revise. Most assume that what has happened is sealed, that memory is merely an echo of what was, unchangeable and inert. But the divine truth is this: memory is imagination clothed in habit, and imagination is the father. That which you remember you continue to assume, and what you assume, you live. The past, then, is not behind you, it is within you, alive only because you keep feeding it with belief. You have carried many yesterdays that do not belong to you. You have accepted scenes like verdicts, believed stories as prisons, nodded silently to sorrow, as if it had the final word. But your soul knows better. Your soul remembers the garden before the fall, the light before the veil, the voice before the world taught you to doubt it. And that voice still speaks. You are not what happened, you are what you accept as true. Revision is not about denial. It is not pretending the pain was never there. It is the holy act of redemption. It is the sacred use of imagination to recall differently, to see the same scene with new eyes, divine eyes, to take a moment of hurt and dress it in healing, to let the past yield its harvest, not of fear, but of fulfillment. For every moment contains within it a seed, the seed of what you choose to make it mean. You do not need permission to do this. You are the operant power. You are the author and the editor, the scribe and the spirit. No one else needs to agree. No one else even needs to know. In the stillness of your room, in the silence behind closed lids, you may enter the scene once again, not as victim, but as creator. Imagine the moment as it was. See it, feel it, smell the atmosphere. Let the memory rise, just long enough to witness it without fear. And then from that sacred center within, begin to shift it, gently, like molding clay warmed in the hands. Change what was said, alter what was done, replace the sting with sweetness. Watch the frown soften, hear the words you long to hear, feel the embrace that never came, and then dwell in it. Linger in the revised version, until it feels more natural than the old one, until it feels like truth. For truth is not what the world told you. Truth is what you accept, persist in, and saturate your inner world with. Truth as you live it within, becomes form without, and what you revise in imagination ripples forward and back, undoing what seemed irreversible, replacing it with grace. Most never experience this because they are hypnotized by chronology. They believe cause precedes effect, and the past rules the present. But you know better. Imagination is outside of time. Spirit is not linear. The moment you revise a memory, you touch eternity. The new scene, accepted fully, becomes the new cause, and life reshapes itself accordingly. You will find as you begin to walk this path, that the world bends in quiet astonishment. Relationships that once seemed broken may soften. Circumstances mysteriously improve. Even your body, holding the memory of old beliefs, begins to heal. This is not magic. This is law. Consciousness is the only reality. Feel what stirs in you now, not just the hope of it, but the remembrance. Something ancient inside you already knows how to do this. You have done it before, in dreams, in prayer, in those quiet moments, when you changed your mind and everything changed with it. And as that remembrance awakens, a new question begins to whisper through the stillness. If you can revise the past, what else have you falsely accepted as permanent? What other doors remain open, disguised as walls? What if every closed chapter still waits to be rewritten from within? And as that question lingers, what else have you falsely accepted as permanent? A gentle unease begins to surface, not of fear, but of possibility. The kind of holy restlessness that signals the soul is waking from a long sleep. For if one memory can be redeemed, if one chapter can be rewritten in the silence of your own imagination, then the entire story is fluid. Not one line is final, not one ending is closed. This brings us to what most never realize. The past is not held in the events themselves, but in the meaning you continue to give them, and meaning is yours to assign. Like a potter shaping clay, you were never meant to live under the shadow of old scenes, but to recast them in the light of who you now remember yourself to be. The story bends when the storyteller awakens. Each moment you revisit with your inner eye, you are not just observing, you are planting. The memory becomes soil, and your assumption, the seed, what you feel in that inner revision germinates. It takes root below the surface of things, and blossoms outward as altered relationships, revised outcomes, even new opportunities, where none seemed possible. This is not imagination as fantasy. This is imagination as fact, as the very breath of God shaping what was into what is. The world teaches you to analyze your past, to dissect it, to assign blame, to find patterns of failure, and wear them like identity. But the Spirit within teaches you to redeem. Though your sins be as scarlet, they shall be white as snow, not because time erased them, but because you no longer hold them as true. Forgiveness in its highest form is revision, and to forgive yourself is to release the version of the past that no longer serves the becoming of your soul. Feel this now. Feel the mercy that flows when you withdraw your energy from an old hurt and reinvest it into a new vision, not by force, but by stillness, not by pretending, but by choosing. The same scene, made new. That is the power you carry. You begin to see that every painful moment is an invitation, every regret, a doorway, every wound, a canvas awaiting the touch of the divine painter within you. You are not rewriting to escape. You are rewriting to reveal the eternal truth that was always buried beneath the temporary appearance. The truth that you were never separate, never unworthy, never forgotten. You were only sleeping. And as you revise, again and again, until the new memory feels more natural than the old, you realize something deeper still. The world begins to forget what you no longer assume. People forget to treat you the way they once did. Circumstances forget to repeat. Even your body forgets the story of pain it once held in its cells, because you, the operant power, have rewritten the script. This is why Neville called imagination the only redemptive power in man. Not logic, not force, not repetition without vision, but the sacred sovereign act of feeling into the scene, until it becomes real, real enough that you walk forward from it as if it had always been this way. You do not beg for change, you do not wait for signs, you assume the new past with the same faith, you assume the rising of the sun, you take it into your inner sanctuary, and dwell in it. For he who dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. That secret place is imagination, and it is there the divine story is rewritten. Breathe into this. Let the mind grow quiet. Let the memory rise, the one you've carried like a stone, and now softly, with reverence reimagine it, re-see it, this time from love, this time from power, this time as the one who knows how the story ends. And as the new scene takes root in your being, notice what begins to dissolve. The tightness in the chest, the heaviness in the gut, the narrative of lack. It slips away, not because the world changed first, but because you did. And now the world must follow. It has no choice, for consciousness is the cause. But what if you dared to go further, not only to revise the painful past, but to revise the neutral, the forgotten, the subtle scenes you never questioned? What if even the seemingly insignificant holds power in its retelling? And as that realization blooms, that even the quiet forgotten moments are malleable, a deeper reverence settles in your being, for not only the traumas, but the unnoticed, the mundane, the fleeting glances and passing words, these too shape the tapestry of your world, and these too can be rewritten. What you accept as insignificant still echoes in the chambers of your consciousness, feeding the assumptions you call fate. You begin to understand, nothing is neutral, every impression carried into sleep, every inner comment replayed, every interpretation left unchallenged. These are the building blocks of your tomorrows, the waiter's indifference, the teacher's passing remark, the memory of standing unnoticed in a crowded room. You may not have grieved them, but they entered you and you built quietly upon them. So now, with the gentleness of one tending to a sleeping child, you return and look again. See that moment. Not because it hurt, but because it shaped. Perhaps it was small, so small you almost missed it. A friend who forgot to reply, a parent who praised another, a silence where a word should have been. These are not stones to carry, but seeds to revise. Replant them now, in the fertile soil of assumption, with the waters of imagination and the light of feeling. Speak the words you wish had been spoken. Feel the warmth you longed for. Insert into the scene the awareness that you mattered, that you were seen, that you were chosen. For in the kingdom of God, no scene is too small to redeem. Not a sparrow falls to the ground without your Father, said the Christ. And if the divine takes notice of the smallest creature, then surely every moment of your story is worthy of love's attention. Every breath, sacred, every memory, moldable. Let yourself go back, not with resistance, but with quiet authority. Revision is not reliving, it is reclaiming. You do not fall into the past, you rise within it. You become the author within the memory, not the character trapped by it. The shift is subtle, but it is everything. You no longer ask, did it happen this way? You now ask, what do I assume it means? And when the meaning no longer serves the life you now choose, you revise it, not out of fear, but out of mastery, not to hide, but to reveal what always lived beneath the surface. You revise not to pretend the old never happened, but to liberate yourself from the false identity it formed. Feel this power, not as concept, but as breath, as your own heartbeat reminding you, you are not what you remember, you are what you accept as your truth now. And if you truly accept the revised scene, fully and completely, the outer world will mirror it back to you, in ways both tender and profound. It may come as a shift in someone's tone, a letter long forgotten, a new opportunity that seems to erase the path behind you. But no matter the form, it will come, because nothing remains outside the reach of your assumption. What you revise in imagination must express in form, for the world is simply a mirror of consciousness made visible. And now something deeper emerges, not just the healing of the past, but the redefinition of who you are. Because as you revise enough scenes, as you lovingly retell the moments that once wrote limitation into your script, you begin to forget the version of yourself who once lived that story. The old self becomes faint, distant, and the new self, the remembered self, becomes your dwelling place. You are no longer the one waiting for approval, for permission, for change to come from outside. You are the one who remembers, the one who rewrites, the one who lives from the end, and lets the world rearrange accordingly. And as this identity roots itself deeper, a soft question stirs from within. If even the subtle memories can be revised, what happens when you begin to revise today, before it has even ended? What shifts when you rewrite the present moment, before the ink is dry? And as that question breathes its way into your awareness, what shifts when you revise today before the ink is dry? Something extraordinary begins to unfold within you. You see, you are not bound to wait until the day is done, until the wounds are old, and the memories hardened. You can revise now. You can meet the living moment, with the softness of vision, and change its course as it moves through you. Most imagine revision as something backward-facing, but time in truth is not linear. It folds, it curves, it bends beneath the will of the one who knows who they are. The present, though dressed in movement and noise, is just as pliable as the past. It responds not to fact, but to feeling. And the feeling you embody now becomes the unseen ink, writing your next unfolding. So when the conversation goes poorly, revise it as you walk away. When the message disappoints, revise it before you reply. When the glance unsettles you, revise it in the moment it lingers. Not with resistance, not with force, but with the still quiet remembrance. I am not what appears, I am what I assume. Let the scene unfold in imagination as it ought to have gone. Let the words be kind, let the atmosphere be light, let your inner man be honored, supported, chosen. You do not need the world to say it first. You say it within, and the world catches up, for it always must. This is the discipline of the awakened, not to react, but to redeem, not to chase, but to claim. You reclaim the present as it comes to you, not after it has formed, but while it is still breath, still vapor, still available for transformation. You begin to live like the sculptor with clay that never hardens. You walk through the day with the quiet authority of one who knows nothing is fixed. And because of this knowing, you suffer less. You linger less in what seemed unfair. You release faster, because you remember you can rewrite faster. And it is here that the miraculous becomes ordinary. Not because the world has changed, but because you no longer treat it as master. You meet each moment with the quiet assurance, I am the cause, I am the mirror in which life reflects itself. and this scene too, shall bend to the image I hold within. Feel the stillness that comes with this. Feel the power in your breath, when you pause, revise and assume again, not later, but now. You may be standing in line, driving in silence, washing your hands beneath the faucet, and even then, even there, you can revise. You can return to a scene from earlier today, and breathe it anew. You can choose again, you can recreate, and when you do, something subtle begins to shift in your outer world. People become softer, delays dissolve, the right words find their way to you. Why? Because your consciousness has already moved, and the shadow, the world has no choice but to follow. This is not delusion, this is dominion, this is not escapism, this is spiritual precision. It is choosing to see not what the world shows, but what God within you knows, that you are the operant power, that you were given dominion over all things, and that includes this moment, here, now. And the more you live this way, the more natural it becomes, until you no longer carry your days like weight, but like wet clay in the hands of the beloved, until each hour becomes a living prayer, each breath a whispered revision. You become the quiet weaver of meaning, not loud, not boastful, just still, still enough to notice when the old pattern tries to return, still enough to revise it before it roots, still enough to plant a new seed, the very moment the old one shows itself. And in this quiet practice of sacred editing, the days themselves begin to shine, because you are no longer moving through life as the effect, but as the cause. And soon the lines between memory and prophecy begin to blur, because what you revise today does not only change what was, it reshapes what will be. Which brings us to the deeper mystery, hidden in plain sight. What if you didn't wait for experience to revise, but revised in advance? What if you imagined the day before it arrived? And what if the world rose up to meet your vision, as if it had no other choice? And as that mystery stirs in your chest, what if you revised in advance, before the day unfolded? You begin to feel a sacred reversal rising within you. No longer are you reacting to what comes, you are preparing the way. You are walking before the moment, and shaping it with unseen hands. Just as a gardener does not wait for the weeds to come before tending the soil, you do not wait for the unwanted to appear before claiming the desired. This is the hidden grace of revision. It is not only retroactive, it is creative. It is the womb of your morning, the quiet architecture of your day before the world awakens, before your feet touch the floor, before the sun peers through the window. You have already walked the corridors of your becoming, and you have chosen. You choose how the meeting goes, you choose how the stranger responds, you choose the kindness, the clarity, the peace. You do not wait to see if the day brings joy, you plant it. You do not hope for ease, you imagine ease. You do not ask whether life will smile, you assume the smile within, and the reflection must follow. You wake not into the world, but into the world you have inwardly created. And though the outer may still echo the past for a time, you rest in the knowing, it will bend, it must, for your assumption is the law, and you live now from the end, not the evidence. This is not effort, this is not strain, it is soft, it is still, it is done in the quiet space, where no one else can see you, but all things are moved. Before they call, I will answer, says the scripture, and you begin to understand what that truly means. You move into the inner room, you speak the word, and the outer world becomes the echo. Feel this power, not as potential, but as presence. It is yours now. You can lie in your bed, and revise the day not yet begun. You can hear the compliments, feel the success, enjoy the laughter. You can see the check arrive, the phone ring, the healing unfold, and because you feel it now, you set it in motion. The bridge of incidents begins forming, and you are gently carried across. There is no effort in this, no striving, only knowing. You do not chase what you have already assumed. You do not force what has already been felt. You walk in stillness, clothed in the feeling of your answered prayer. This is where imagination becomes prophecy, not as a prediction of what might come, but as a decree of what already is in the unseen. And because you live from it, not toward it, life unfolds in your likeness. You become the fulfilled version of yourself, before any confirmation arrives, and by the time it does, it feels inevitable. The world may still offer contrast, you may still witness echoes of the old,
but you do not waver. You know the script has already been rewritten. You know the day has already been revised, and what appears is just a shadow, catching up to the light within. You are not forecasting, you are remembering forward. You are feeling what has already been accepted in imagination, and the feeling, the felt state, is the evidence that it is done. So each morning becomes holy, each evening, a return to the inner altar, and your life once dictated by outer events, becomes a song authored from within. Let this be your practice now, not only to revise what has happened, but to pre-revise what will be, not out of fear, but out of faith, not to control the world, but to walk as one who knows the kingdom is within, as one who knows the scene must follow the script, as one who remembers the garden even in the wilderness. And then as this way of being deepens, you begin to sense an even more radiant truth, waiting beneath the surface. What if you revised not just the day, not just the past, but yourself? What if you rewrote the one who lived those stories, until only the divine image remained? And as that shimmering question enters your awareness, what if you rewrote the self who lived those stories? You feel the veil thinning once more, for the greatest revision is not of events, but of identity, not the scenes, but the seer, not the page, but the one holding the pen. So many attempt to revise the fragments of life, while still clinging to the old self, who attracted them. They dress the wounds in silk, but never dissolve the one who was wounded. But you are beginning to sense that true transformation flows not from fixing the past, but from releasing the version of you who needed it. That former self, the one who was hurt, overlooked, doubted, denied, is not your home. It was never your true reflection, only a mask formed by forgotten assumptions. Revision, in its highest form, is resurrection, not of a memory, but of the divine image, the image buried beneath years of reaction and false belief. And to revise the self, is to call forth that image again, to breathe into it, to clothe it with new acceptance, and to walk in its likeness as though it had never been forgotten. You do this not by force, not by denial, but by selection. You select the self you now choose to embody, the one who is already whole, the one who was never unworthy, the one who lives from the end, not in search of it. You accept this self in imagination, not as a hope, but as a fact. You feel what it would be like to be that one now, and you live from that state, as though the former identity had already passed away, and it has. If any man be in Christ, he is a new creature. Old things are passed away, behold, all things are become new. You revise the inner man, and the outer world reconfigures, not by struggle, not by effort, but by law. And yet it may feel strange at first. There may be echoes of the old self, habits that arise, emotions that flicker, but they are shadows, not substance. You do not fight them, you simply remember, I have revised, I have chosen anew, I no longer carry that story, because I am no longer that self. The world will catch up, it must. As you practice this, you'll notice something remarkable. You begin to remember differently. Memories once soaked in sadness begin to shift tone. People who played roles in your pain now appear as catalysts for your awakening. You no longer see from the eyes of the wounded, but from the one who has already been redeemed. Revision then becomes a sacred undoing of false identity. The mind is renewed, and with it the life, and from this new self, you revise more purely. You imagine without desperation, you assume without effort, you forgive without needing apology, because you are no longer trying to protect the self who was small, you are embodying the self who is eternal. Feel the peace of that, the weightlessness, the deep subtle joy of no longer needing to become. You are, you remember who you are, and from that remembrance, the world bows in recognition. This is not a mental trick, it is not surface affirmation, it is surrender to the deeper truth, that your identity has always been yours to choose, and once you choose it, persist in it, clothe yourself in it, let your inner conversations match it, let your reactions fall away, until only the new man remains. And if ever the world tries to reflect the old, you smile, not in frustration, but in faith, knowing it is only the echo of an assumption no longer alive. You do not go back to revise the scene again. You remain in the new identity, and by remaining, you fulfill the revision at its highest level. This prepares you for something most never dare to imagine. If the self can be rewritten, and the world must conform to that rewritten self, what if nothing you desire is ever outside of you at all? What if every longing is just memory misread, and every fulfillment already dwells in the self you've chosen to become?
And as that sacred echo lingers, what if every longing is simply memory misread? A deeper hush falls over your inner world, for the search outside begins to lose its urgency. The striving fades. You realize with a stillness more powerful than thunder that what you have longed for has never been absent, only unrecognized within you. Desire is not distance. It is not lack. It is memory rising from the depths, clothed in the garments of yearning. It whispers not of what you do not have, but of what you already are. The moment you revise the self, when you shed the identity that once disqualified you, you discover the fulfillment was always encoded within the new assumption. You were never seeking something out there. You were remembering what has always lived in you. This is the divine paradox. The desire appears as a future thing, yet it is fulfilled only by being assumed now. To live in the end is not to chase, it is to inhabit. And once you dwell in that state, the world rearranges, not to give you something, but to reveal the thing you've already accepted. So you stop asking when, you stop asking how, you stop trying to bend circumstances, and instead you revise your dwelling place. You move into the inner state, where the desire is no longer desire, but truth. And because it is truth in you, the shadow of your world must echo it in form. Feel the holiness of that, not the excitement of grasping, but the serenity of resting. The God within you is not impressed by effort. It moves by faith, not faith in waiting, but faith in assuming. When ye pray, believe that ye have received it, and ye shall. It is already done, not because you begged, but because you accepted. And so you revise not only the memory, and not only the self, but the very nature of desire. You stop interpreting it as absence. You see it as signal. You see it as the voice of the Father within, calling you into remembrance. It is not asking you to earn. It is asking you to return to the place in consciousness where you and the fulfilled state are one. You begin to understand now why revision is so powerful, not because it manipulates events, but because it restores identity. And from that restored identity, the world becomes fertile again, fertile for joy, fertile for love, fertile for peace. Because the inner soil has been rewritten, there is no more fear in your imagination. You no longer hesitate to touch the scene, to change the outcome, to enter the moment again, and rewrite it. For you have seen the one revising is God, and God cannot be unworthy of his own desires. You do not revise because the story went wrong. You revise because the old self could not yet carry the blessing. And now, having remembered who you are, you rise in imagination, not as someone hoping, but as someone knowing. You let the vision be vivid. You let the feelings be real. You let the imagined scene become more familiar than the former fact, and you persist, not in time, but in depth. The more you dwell in this inner reality, the less attached you become to what seems to be. You watch the world like a dream changing mid-sleep. You walk through your days like one who has already arrived. You smile at delay. You bless the seeming contradiction, because you know the deeper truth. You are not waiting for fulfillment. You are fulfillment, unfolding. And so the longing dissolves, not because the outer has changed yet, but because you no longer feel lack. You revise the self that once lacked, and now you walk not toward the vision, but from it. Your speech changes, your posture shifts, the tone of your life softens, because the seed has already taken root within. And in this softness something new begins to stir, quieter than all the others, but deeper still. What if revision was not merely a technique to apply, but the very nature of consciousness itself? What if every moment is an invitation to choose again, see again, be again, until there is nothing left to fix, only more to remember? And as that gentle question rises, what if revision is not merely a technique, but the nature of consciousness itself? A deeper current begins to move within you. You feel it not as an idea, but as a recognition, long buried beneath the noise of striving. For creation is not fixed, reality is not rigid. Everything that appears is but the reflection of a moment chosen within. You do not simply revise with consciousness, you revise as consciousness, That which you call revision is simply the movement of awareness into a new assumption. It is the return of the prodigal thought to the Father's house. The moment you change your mind, not intellectually, but in feeling, you have revived, and life obedient to your inner stance must shift to reflect it. Nothing stands still. There is no past but what you carry, no future but what you plant, and the present, it bends always to the direction of your assumption. This is the fluid nature of consciousness, eternal, undivided, and wholly at your command. This is why it is written, "Be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind," not by effort, not by repetition, but by renewing again and again your position within. For every scene that seems fixed is held only by your continued agreement with it. Withdraw that agreement, and the scene dissolves, not as punishment, not as magic, but as law. You are not at the mercy of memory. You are not bound by the script you once accepted. You are the Word made flesh, and the Word can be spoken anew. Feel this now, deep in your breath. Feel this now, deep in your breath. Revision is not a thing you do. It is a way of being, the continual practice of choosing what you dwell upon, the steady art of refusing to make an idol of what was, the sacred authority of letting go, not because the past never happened, but because you no longer need it to shape you. You are the shaper now. You are the sculptor in the sanctuary of silence. And as you revise, not only events, but meanings, identities, and expectations, you do not merely improve your story. You reveal the divine pattern beneath it. You lift the veil, and allow the light to fall where before there was only shadow. This is the work of God in man, to reimagine what seemed lost, and by that imagining, resurrect it anew. You were not sent into this world to endure reality. You were sent to remember your power to remake it. Revision is the whisper of heaven within your hands, and so in each moment, you ask yourself, not with fear, but with peace, what am I consenting to now? What version of this scene do I accept as true? What identity am I inhabiting by the tone of my thoughts, the flavor of my feeling, the shape of my inner dialogue? For you are revising constantly, whether you know it or not. The only question is, are you doing it consciously, with love, with vision, with faith, or are you rehearsing the old out of habit? But now you are awake, even in the stillness of this moment, you are remembering, and with that remembrance, the power to choose returns to you. So gently now, as you rest in the rhythm of your own breath, begin to notice the scenes you are still holding as fixed, the conversation you keep replaying, the version of yourself you still reference, and now in the quiet space where no one can see, re-enter that memory, not to relive, but to redeem, not to correct, but to create. Let it unfold as it should have. Let it reflect the truth of who you are now. Hear the words that free you. See the gesture that brings peace. Feel the embrace of understanding. Dwell there, not as a visitor, but as the author. Stay until it feels more real than what came before. Stay until it is yours. And as you open your eyes to the world once more, hold this one truth like a flame. Nothing is final, unless you say it is. All things are waiting to be made new by your assumption, which leads to the most tender revelation yet. If revision is your nature, then every regret is simply grace, waiting to be remembered differently. What if even your deepest sorrow could become the birthplace of your most radiant becoming? And as that final question rests in your chest, what if even your deepest sorrow could become the birthplace of your most radiant becoming? Something sacred stirs behind the veil, for pain too is a messenger. Regret is not the enemy, it is a doorway. It is the echo of a moment asking to be seen again, this time with eyes of compassion, not judgment, with hands that heal, not grasp. You were never meant to carry your sorrow like a sentence. You were meant to transmute it, to take even the darkest soil of your memory and grow something luminous from within it. And revision is how the soul speaks to the ashes, saying, rise. You do not need to pretend the wound never came. You simply return to it with new light. For when you revise the scene that broke your heart, you are not denying its impact. You are rewriting its meaning. You are claiming your dominion over it. You are saying, this too shall serve me. This too shall reflect the image of God. The world says pain is real, and joy is fragile. But you, awakened one, are beginning to feel the opposite. You are beginning to see that joy is the constant beneath every ache, beneath every memory, beneath every scar, waiting to be called forth by your imagination, waiting to be revealed through the act of revision. Let your imagination return to that sorrow now, not to dwell in it, but to redeem it. Maybe it was a goodbye that shattered your certainty. Maybe it was a silence that grew too wide to cross. Maybe it was a dream that dissolved in your hands before it had the chance to live. But whatever it was, it is not greater than you. See the scene, let it rise, and now change it. Not the faces, unless you wish, but the meaning. Let the goodbye become a blessing. Let the silence be filled with understanding. Let the dream return, not as fantasy, but as resurrection. And above all, let you be different in that moment. Not smaller, but wiser. Not wounded, but radiant. Assume the self you now know to be true, whole, beloved, divine, and let that version of you inhabit the memory. Let that version rewrite the lines. Let that version stay. This is grace, not the kind given by the world, but the grace of your own consciousness offering you a second birth, not by time, but by vision. And what once brought you to your knees now becomes the altar where your new life begins. And as you do this again and again, you begin to see that nothing is wasted. No moment, no tear, no loss. All of it becomes raw material for your becoming. All of it, once revised, becomes sacred evidence that you are the operant power, that you are not the sum of what happened. You are the chooser of what it becomes. You begin to thank the scenes that once burdened you, not because they were right, but because they brought you to this knowing. You are the author, even of pain. And once you revise, the story shifts. And when the story shifts, so does the self. And when the self is new, the future is no longer bound to the old plot. You are writing forward now, but from within, no longer reacting but remembering. And this remembrance becomes your rest, your quiet joy, your secret sanctuary. So the deepest sorrows are no longer threats, they are seeds. Seeds that bloom when held in imagination, watered by love, and warmed by assumption. And what grows from them is not the old life repaired, it is the new life revealed. The life that was always yours beneath the forgetting. Breathe into that. Feel how even your heaviest memory can soften in the presence of vision. Feel how even the most bitter moment can sweeten when touched by the hand of God within you. And now a stillness settles, a kind of reverence, because if this is true, if even sorrow can be revised, then there is no darkness that cannot be transformed by the light of your awareness, which opens the door to something even more tender, more daring. What if the world itself, this vast collective play of history and form, was waiting for you to revise it from within? What if your imagination doesn't just redeem your past, but awakens creation itself? And as that tender wonder unfurls, what if your imagination doesn't merely redeem your past, but awakens creation itself? A quiet awe begins to rise in the stillness of your being, for the line between personal and collective is thinner than the world has taught you. The veil that seems to separate your inner world from the world around you is nothing more than sustained agreement. An agreement, like memory, can be revised. The world appears as something solid, structured, bound by history and law, but beneath its form, beneath the headlines and headlines before them, is consciousness, ever responding, ever mirroring, ever moved by assumption. And if consciousness is the only reality, then the one who dares to revise within is not merely healing a life, but reauthoring the dream of the world. This is not grandiosity, it is not illusion, it is spiritual fact. As within, so without, as above, so below. Your inner conversations, your silent corrections, your unseen visions of peace, they ripple into the vast field of shared reality, and take root where you least expect them. Every time you revise a moment of conflict into understanding, a little more harmony breathes through the world. Every time you rewrite fear into faith, the atmosphere shifts. It is not always immediate, and it does not always come with applause, but it comes, because imagination is not a private chamber, it is the birthplace of all things seen. You begin to understand now why it is said that creation waits in eager longing for the revealing of the sons of God, not those born of flesh, but those awakened in spirit, those who remember that to see rightly is to make right, that to revise with love is to serve the whole. You are not apart from the world you see, you are its center, and the world is your mirror, responding always to the image you hold within. This is why even your most secret assumptions matter, why your inner gaze is not passive, but participatory. You are always casting your vote for what shall be, not with ballot or protest, but with the quality of your attention. Where you dwell in consciousness becomes the world's direction, and when you revise, you are not only changing what was, you are reshaping what will be for all who share your field. Feel the humility of that, the quiet majesty. This is not about control, it is about communion, the divine working through you,
as you for the healing of the dream we call reality, and the healing begins not in the systems or the structures, or the speeches, but in the silent sanctuary, where one soul dares to see differently. You can begin now, not with the weight of fixing the world, but with the lightness of remembering its true image. See the same event that once stirred despair, and revise it from love. See the same nation, the same face, the same problem, and imagine it whole, imagine it blessed, imagine it as it would appear if God were fully seen in it. You may not yet see the change with your eyes, but that matters little. What matters is that you remain faithful to the vision, that you revise the world not according to what it has done, but according to what it is in spirit. And the more you do, the more the world softens, opportunities open, peace replaces panic, strangers become brothers. You begin to feel it in the texture of the day, in the tone of conversations, in the hidden grace that follows you like a shadow of your own imagination. This is the deeper purpose of revision, not just the healing of memory, but the restoration of vision. The world becomes beautiful again, because you see it that way, and in your seeing, you create. Let this settle in your bones. Let it become the way you move. To revise a memory is to heal the self. To revise a thought is to heal the moment. But to revise your vision of the world, that is to let God speak through your eyes. And so you walk no longer hoping for change, but being the change. Not as an effort, but as a resting place. Not as an act of doing, but of dwelling, which invites the quietest revelation yet. What if the entire journey of your life, every joy, every sorrow, every turn, was preparing you for this, to become the one who revises from love, not for personal gain, but as a vessel of remembrance for all creation? And as that tender wondering takes hold, what if your whole life has been preparing you to revise from love, not for gain, but as a vessel of remembrance for all creation? You feel something within you begin to kneel, not in weakness, but in reverence, for suddenly even the sorrow has purpose, even the detours gleam with hidden design, the missteps, the unanswered prayers, the years spent searching, all of it now curves inward, toward this holy center, where you awaken not as the seeker, but as the revealer. For who but the one who has known both pain and presence, could understand the weight of memory, and the power of its release? Who but the one who once assumed limitation could stand now in quiet authority, and declare, I have remembered who I am? You do not arrive at this power through theory. You arrive through the texture of life lived, and life revised. Revision, then, is no longer a tool, it is worship. It is the invisible altar, where you lay down what was, and lift up what always has been. It is not merely a technique, it is the language of the divine self reclaiming its dominion. You kneel, and in kneeling, you rise. This is why the journey mattered, not because it gave you answers, but because it brought you back to the only answer that ever was. You are the operant power, not a fragment of God, not a child of fate, but the living word, clothed in memory, and now returning to imagination. So you look back on your life with new eyes. You revisit the chapters that once closed too soon, the doors that stayed shut, the years that felt silent, and with each one, you offer the gentle hand of revision, not to erase, but to redeem. You revise the you who lived it. You let them be strong, even when they weren't. You let them be chosen, even when they were overlooked. You let them speak, even if they once remained silent. You do this not because they failed, but because you now see what they could not. And in this seeing, you become the bridge. You revise backward to awaken forward. You alter what was assumed, so that what will be must come in new form. This is the gift you carry, not to escape the world, but to reimagine it from within. You become a quiet miracle walking, not in grandeur, not in spectacle, but in stillness. You walk into rooms, and the atmosphere shifts, because your inner state speaks louder than words. You meet others, and without telling your story, you reflect to them a version of themselves they had forgotten. You revise not just for your own becoming, but for the collective remembering of what is holy. And when you go to sleep at night, you no longer replay the day with the weight of what went wrong. You revise it gently, scene by scene, until peace returns. You do not fall asleep in reaction, you fall asleep in creation. You drift into that sacred twilight, with the new version impressed on your being, knowing that your assumption shall harden into fact, for this is law. You know now that there are no idle moments. Every thought is creative, every feeling is formative. So you watch the garden of your inner world with love, not with fear, but with clarity. You are not guarding against weeds, you are blessing the soil. You are not trying to be perfect, you are learning to stay awake, and in this wakefulness, something ancient rises, a memory, older than thought, deeper than time, the memory of being the light before the form, the voice before the sound, the author before the page, and as this remembrance settles into your breath, into your bones, you begin to walk as one who does not fear the future, for you no longer expect it to define you. You have learned to define it in advance, with the brushstrokes of assumption, and the palette of love, and now with the softest whisper, the spirit within leans forward, and asks, what if the version of you that lives in the end, that radiant, fulfilled, unshaken self, has been revising you all along? What if your desires come not to show you what is missing, but to call you back to the one who never forgot? And as that holy suggestion settles into the quiet corners of your awareness, that the fulfilled self may have been revising you all along, something inside you softens, the striving slows, the need to fix, to prove, to chase, it loosens its grip, for you sense perhaps for the first time, that the one you are becoming is not new, it is ancient, it is familiar, it is you, returning to yourself by way of desire. Desire is not lack, it is memory in disguise, it is the whisper of your completed self reaching back through the veil, calling you forward, with images of fulfillment, with scenes of peace, with longings that do not point outward, but inward, toward the state, where it is already done. That version of you, the one living in the end, has always known the way, and so you are not alone in your revisions, you are being led, gently, silently, by the self who already stands in the answered prayer. Every time you return to a painful memory, every time you rewrite a conversation in the silence of imagination, it is not effort, it is alignment. You are syncing with the rhythm of your fulfilled identity. You are remembering what was never actually lost. It is not a process of becoming more, it is the surrender of all that is false. You do not revise to improve who you are, you revise to reveal who you are. And when the old assumptions fall away, when the lies crumble, and the shadows lift, the true self remains, unchanged, eternal, radiant. This is why your revision carries power, because it is not wishful thinking, it is communion with truth. The truth that the past is not fixed, the present is not random, the future is not uncertain, all is shaped by your awareness, and your awareness is always free to choose again. So you rest now in the wisdom of your own desire. You see that it was never taunting you, it was guiding you. The things you longed for were not distant, they were blueprints, invitations, clues, and with each revision, you became more fluent in the language of your higher self. You became less concerned with what the world was showing, and more devoted to what you were assuming. Feel the relief of that, the ease of it. You no longer have to chase signs or manipulate matter. You simply return, again and again, to the inner scene. You dwell in the end. You live from the state of the wish fulfilled. You rehearse only the reality that reflects who you truly are, and the world adjusts itself accordingly. Even now, you can sense it, the shift, the echo. Something in the unseen is moving, not because you pleaded, but because you assumed. You revised not to force the world, but to remember your place within it, as its author, as its light, as the consciousness from which all things spring. And so, when a memory rises that once made you shrink, you no longer brace, you welcome it, you embrace it like a dream being rescripted. You close your eyes, return to the scene, and ask, what does the fulfilled version of me know about this? What would they feel, say, see, hear? And then you allow that self to breathe into the moment, to revise it, to make it new. You become the living bridge between the old and the eternal. You carry the lamp of awareness through every corridor of memory, and shine until the room becomes warm again. You do not revisit the past to grieve, it has already passed. You revisit to liberate the part of you that got left behind, and once liberated, that version merges with you now, whole, healed, and free. This is the sacred work of revision. It is the rescue of the fragmented self, drawn back into the light of assumption. It is the soul gathering itself into completion. You are not fixing history, you are restoring identity. And from this place, you begin to notice something subtle, yet profound. What if all of life, every reflection, every delay, every echo, was simply showing you the difference between who you've assumed you are, and who you truly are, beneath it all? What if revision isn't about changing the world, but letting the false self fall away, until only the divine self remains?
And as that quiet revelation lingers, what if revision is not about changing the world, but letting the false self fall away until only the divine self remains. Something within you exhales. A deep, subtle surrender begins to move through the body, as though the inner weight you once carried was never yours, but only borrowed from mistaken identity. For you were never meant to bend to what was. You were meant to awaken to what is, to the eternal I am beneath every passing appearance. The false self clings to evidence. It repeats the story of how it was wronged, how it failed, how it lacks. It gathers memory like dust and builds identity from the past. But the divine self, it has no past to defend. It is pure being. It is the light before the form, the love before the pain, the stillness beneath the noise. And revision is how you return to it. Not by striving to become, but by letting go of what you never truly were. Each revision you make, each time you enter a memory and rewrite it in the light of your fulfilled self, you chip away at the illusion that you are bound by what happened. You dissolve the scaffolding of the old man and let the new man rise, not as a future goal, but as a present reality. You do not create the divine self. You uncover it. You do not reach for it. You remember it. This is why the act of revision is holy, because it is the undoing of belief in separation. It is the silent declaration that you no longer identify with fear, or failure, or fragments of who you once assumed yourself to be. You reclaim your story, not because it defines you, but because it no longer does. You become free. You become new, and yet not new in the way the world understands, not improved, not enhanced, but new in the sense of original, as in the garden, as in the beginning. The self you revise into being is not better, it is truer. You return not to the child, but to the innocence before the child was shaped. You return to the image and likeness that was never broken. This is the mystery Paul spoke of when he said, "Put off the old man, and put on the new man, which after God is created in righteousness and true holiness." It is not about earning holiness. It is about assuming it, wearing it, dwelling in it so deeply that the world forgets to reflect anything else. And so you walk now in this holy revision, not just of memory but of meaning. You do not rewrite the events of your life so you can feel better about them. You rewrite them because they were never what they appeared to be. You see now with spiritual eyes. You know that everything that came before was clay waiting for your touch. And as you touch it with new vision, new identity, new assumption, it changes. The past changes. The future reorients, and the present becomes soft again. You begin to notice how light you feel, how peace becomes your natural resting place, how the mind grows quieter, not because the world is quieter, but because you no longer react to what is unchosen. You no longer repeat the inner noise that once created outer chaos. You have chosen anew, and what is chosen, when assumed in feeling, must appear. This is the gentle power you now live from. You revise because it is your right. You revise because it is your inheritance. You revise because the divine self cannot live under the false story of the old man. And now that you remember who you are, you can never fully forget again. And perhaps now, a final veil begins to lift. What if revision was never about the scene, or the memory, or the outcome, but about training you to feel the end? What if all of it, the pain, the longing, the triumph, was preparation for one sacred gift, the ability to dwell in the state of fulfillment until it becomes the only reality you know? And as that final veil begins to lift, you feel the quiet echo of something your soul has always known. It was never about the scene, it was always about the state. You were never meant to become a master of memory, but a dweller in the end. Revision was never the destination, only the path that taught you how to feel differently, how to remain in the state of your fulfilled self long enough for the outer world to bow in reflection. The scenes, the stories, the shifting shadows of life, they served their part. They were the gentle teachers, the mirrored lessons, but beneath them all was one golden thread. Can you feel it now, as if it were already done? To revise is to practice this. It is rehearsal not for the mind, but for the spirit. It is not about perfecting details, but anchoring identity. The details shift because the state changes, not the other way around. The moment you revise a moment in imagination, what you are truly doing is choosing a new vibration, a new tone of self, a new dwelling place in consciousness. And once that becomes familiar, the world cannot help but conform. This is why you were taught to live in the end, not because the end is far, but because the end is already within. To live in the end is to think from the goal, not toward it. To speak from healing, not about it. to love from fulfillment, not in search of it. And every act of revision has been leading you to this truth. You are not moving toward a better life. You are remembering the state in which it already exists. You feel the difference now. You sense when you are thinking of the wish, and when you are thinking from it. One keeps the dream at arm's length. The other breathes it into form. You are not a beggar at the gates of your own destiny. You are the heir. And the key has always been the state you dwell in. Feel that now, not as theory, but as embodiment. You are not healing a wound. You are abiding in the version of you that was never wounded. You are not fixing lack. You are becoming the one who has always had, not to escape the past, but to fulfill it from within. And so revision becomes second nature, not an effort, but a movement of grace. When something unwanted happens, you do not react in fear. You pause, you return, you revise not to argue with the shadow, but to reaffirm the light. You dwell again in the end, and that dwelling becomes your offering, your prayer, your assumption. And from that assumption, all things flow, not always immediately, not always visibly, but faithfully, inevitably, because consciousness is the cause, and what you assume with feeling becomes. This is the rhythm of the awakened one, not chasing conditions, not correcting the mirror, but entering the silence, feeling the truth, and letting the world catch up. It is here, in this sacred remembering, that the deepest peace is born, not because the world is perfect, but because you no longer need it to be before you feel the end. You choose your state, and the outer must yield. You return to the scene, not to control it, but to revise your identity within it. And once the inner state is secured, the scene becomes light and malleable again. You carry this peace with you now. You walk in it. You revise as you go, not to fix, but to remain. You remain in the end, until it becomes so natural, so lived, so true within, that the idea of needing proof begins to dissolve. And then something truly miraculous happens. You no longer revise to make something happen. You revise to stay in love. You revise not for change, but for communion. You revise not to escape your past, but to recognize yourself within it, as the one who was always guiding, always imagining, always waiting to be remembered. And as this awareness takes root, a new invitation begins to rise, soft as breath, bold as light. If you now dwell in the state of the wish fulfilled, what becomes of time? What becomes of waiting? What becomes of you, when nothing is missing, and everything flows from the stillness of already having? And as that gentle inquiry unfurls, what becomes of time when you dwell in the end? You begin to notice something strange and luminous. Time itself loosens its grip. The edges blur. The clock no longer commands your attention the way it once did. You are not waiting, you are being. And in the holy stillness of that being, the urgency dissolves like mist in the morning sun. For when you assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled, you step beyond time. You are no longer marching toward what is not yet. You are abiding in what already is in imagination, and therefore must be in form. What the world calls future, you know as now. What it calls delay, you know as unfolding. There is no gap, because you no longer believe in separation. The only time that matters is the one you feel within. And this is the great secret. The state you dwell in does not wait. It gives, it reveals, it knows. The moment you revise a memory, you revise your place in time. You free yourself from the looping repetition of the old self, and you allow something new to emerge. Not someday, but in this breath. You no longer live in the shadow of not yet. You live in the light of it is finished. This is why waiting feels heavy, because waiting is the child of doubt. But when you revise fully, when you surrender completely to the new state, there is no wait at all. There is only unfolding. You stop measuring hours. You stop watching for signs. You feel from the end, and trust the form will follow, because it always has, though you once called it coincidence. Let that feeling move through you now, the warmth of timelessness, the softness of already done. Let your body remember what the mind cannot explain. The moment you feel it real, the path has already begun to shape itself, and it will appear, not because you chased it, but because you assumed it, and rested in its fulfillment. This is the rhythm of divine embodiment, not speed, not striving, but stillness, and from that stillness movement flows, not rushed, not delayed, but in perfect alignment with the state you occupy. The outer world responds, yes, but not to time, to assumption. You become patient, not because you are waiting, but because you are no longer disturbed. You become radiant, not because something arrived, but because you did. You arrived in the state where everything is already yours, and in doing so, time becomes your servant, not your master. And when the outer world seems slow, you smile. You do not rush to revise again out of frustration. You know the seed has been planted. You know the harvest is coming. And more than that, you already feel the fruit in your hand. You are not becoming, you are remembering. And this remembrance bends all things to meet you in their appointed hour. It may not unfold how you thought. It may come through unexpected paths, but it will come, because Lord does not fail, and the world must reflect the state you faithfully. So you rest deeper now. You revise less out of urgency, and more out of joy. You correct old memories, not because they hold power, but because you now hold the pen. You shape the past not to escape it, but to bring it into harmony with the self who lives in the end. And with each revision, you feel more free, not just from what happened, but from time itself. You walk in a different rhythm. You hear life speak in symbols. You see with sacred eyes. And as this becomes natural, another question begins to shimmer just beneath the surface. What if your entire world, every face, every place, every form, is simply your state of consciousness pushed out? And what if revising the world means revising how you see it, not waiting for it to change? And as that new question stirs, what if your world is nothing but your state of consciousness made visible, and revision is simply a change in how you see it? A quiet clarity begins to unfold. You've been looking outward, waiting for signs, adjusting scenes, correcting shadows. But now, the gaze turns inward, not to control the world, but to transfigure it through vision. The world has no life of its own. It moves as you move, feels as you feel, bends as you believe. It is not separate, it is not other, it is your assumption wearing form. And when you revise, not just events, but perception itself, you restore the mirror to reflect the truth of your being, rather than the residue of old identity. You no longer ask the world to confirm your new self. You bless it with your new seeing. The person who once rejected you, you see now, as a reflection of your forgotten worth. The missed opportunity becomes proof that something higher is forming. Even the silence becomes sacred. You revise your interpretation, and that revision becomes transformation. This is the true depth of the law, not to rearrange circumstances endlessly, but to ascend in consciousness so completely that the world must mirror your inner radiance. To the pure all things are pure. The world will not be better when it changes. It will be better when you do, and not in action, but in assumption, in awareness. Feel this. Let it slow your breath. You don't have to move the pieces. You only need to inhabit the eye through which God sees. You do not revise the outer to escape it. You revise the inner vision until the outer dissolves into harmony with it. This is why the awakened one smiles even in the midst of contradiction, because they know the outer world is not final. They do not argue with appearances. They do not plead with time. They simply revise the lens, and the picture must follow. You are the lens. You are the atmosphere. You are the script and the stage. When you see the world as whole, as kind, as yielding to your assumption, it becomes so, not through effort, but through alignment. You are not fighting darkness. You are turning on the light. So the people around you begin to shift, not because they are changing, but because your state no longer sees them as it once did. The same faces now reveal different qualities. The same places now carry different meaning. You revised how you see, and so the mirror returned a new reflection. And when something unwelcome appears, you do not revisit the old self who felt powerless. You remember this is only a shadow of a former assumption. It has no life but what you gave it. And now you give it nothing. You assume again, from the end. You feel the fulfilled state. You revise your gaze, and the world adjusts. This is how you walk in grace, not by waiting for the world to bless you, but by being the blessing through perception. You revise the outer by refusing to see it through the eyes of fear. You revise the past by seeing it as providence. You revise the future by seeing it as already yours. And the more you live this way, the more obvious it becomes. There is nothing outside of you. There never was. The faces, the timelines, the forms, they rise and fall within your own consciousness. And when you revise from love, the world cannot help but soften. Even now, you can feel the invitation, not to force a result, but to remain in the seeing that births it. The self who lives in the end does not wait for change. They carry the change in their gaze, and the world yields like a field beneath the sun. So you return again to the sacred stillness of the revised self.
You dwell in the state of fulfillment. You see from the eyes of the promise kept. You bless the mirror with new assumption, and slowly, gently, your reflection changes. And now as the light settles into your being, one final mystery begins to hum beneath it all. What if the ultimate revision is not of a single moment or memory, but of your understanding of who is doing the imagining? What if you are not just revising your story, but awakening to the one writing it through you? And as that question ripples through your awareness, what if the ultimate revision is not of the seen, but of the seer? A deeper hush begins to fall over the inner world, not silence born of absence, but of presence, a kind of sacred pause that holds more weight than words. For now the focus shifts from what you revise, to who is revising. Who is this I that remembers a different past? Who is this one that sees the world made new? The answer does not arrive in language, it arrives in feeling, in stillness, in that holy place, where the mind no longer reaches, but the soul knows. You have assumed many identities, worn countless names, father, daughter, dreamer, believer. You have revised memories, events, conditions, but beneath it all, one presence has remained untouched, unchangeable, yet endlessly expressive. The one who imagines, the one who assumes, the one who dwells in the end, before the beginning is seen. And that one is God, not the God of distance, but the I am of your being, the still, eternal awareness, from which all things are shaped, and to which all things return. And when you revise, when you choose again, when you clothe a memory in new meaning, it is this presence doing the work. You are not simply healing your past, you are allowing the eternal to rewrite what time once concealed. This is the great mystery, hidden within every act of revision. It is not the human will rearranging shadows, but the divine self, remembering its light. I am the Lord, and besides me there is no Savior. You are not merely becoming better, you are awakening to the only self that ever was. And this self does not strive, it does not force, it simply knows. It sees the end as already accomplished, and moves in rest. It is why when you revise from true assumption, results unfold without effort, because they are not being caused, they are being revealed. So now when you return to revise a moment, a scene, a pattern, you do not do it alone. You bring with you the full power of the indwelling Christ, the Word, the awareness that before Abraham was I am. And when you dwell in this awareness, revision becomes resurrection. What was dead, what was bound in old meaning, is made new. You begin to see how gentle this process is, how sacred. You do not shout at the past, you do not force the present, you whisper into imagination, and the world listens. You feel, and the form takes shape. You remain and the reflection settles around your stillness, like dust finding rest. This is the secret of every fulfilled desire. Not action, but alignment. Not repetition, but revelation. The revealed self is not improved, it is unveiled. And revision again and again thins the veil between what appears and what truly is. So now, as you move through your days, you carry this knowing. You are not simply revising a life, you are returning to the author within it. The one who imagined the beginning, the middle and the end. The one who knows that every scene is useful, every moment redeemable, every story rewritable, because nothing is outside of imagination, and imagination is God in action. Feel the weight of that, and the lightness that follows it. You are not asking the world to change, you are not begging for proof, you are communing with the one who speaks in stillness, and creates through assumption. And this communion becomes your walk, your way, your breath. You revise not to become God, but because you remember that you already are. You revise because you have awakened from the dream of separation. You revise because you now see, every image is your image pushed out. And as this realization deepens, so does your peace. You no longer need to revise every scene, because you have revised the self who once needed them to be different. You live now from the end. You dwell in the finished state. You walk as the one who knows. And just as the breath begins to settle into this new identity, something even more delicate begins to arise. What if the final act of revision is simply the surrender of all technique, and the full embodiment of the state, where nothing ever needed to be changed at all? And as that final question whispers through the quiet, what if nothing ever needed to be changed at all? You feel the last remnant of striving begin to melt. The hands once eager to reshape the world grow still. The mind once looping through correction grows soft. For now you glimpse the highest truth beneath every revision, every imagined scene, every memory made new. It was never broken, it only appeared so, because you saw it through the eyes of forgetting. What if there was never anything to fix, only something to remember? What if the pain, the loss, the moment you thought should have gone differently, were not mistakes, but mirrors, not accidents, but invitations? What if every revision you've practiced has been preparing you not to change the past, but to see the perfection already hidden within it? The moment you revise a memory, you bring it into harmony with the self who has awakened. You bring it out of separation and into union. And yet what if that memory was always whole, only viewed from a fractured self? What if the need to revise fades when the seer no longer believes in separation? This is not denial of experience, it is the revelation of identity. You begin to see your entire life, not as a series of wrong turns, but as a woven dream, stitched by the invisible hand of I Am, always leading you back to yourself. And in that seeing, something dissolves. You revise not because it was wrong, but because now you see it rightly. Judge not according to appearance, but judge righteous judgment. You see now that the appearance deceives. The event is never the truth. The reaction is not final. And when you enter the state of fulfilled self, even the so-called errors become stepping stones of grace. Even the betrayal becomes a bridge. Even the closed door becomes the hand of the loved turning you inward. You realize you no longer need to revise to be free. You revise because you are free. You revise not to perfect the world, but because you are remembering that it already reflects your state, and your state is peace, wholeness, rest. You return to those old scenes and discover they've already changed. You don't need to imagine a different conversation. It speaks differently now. You don't need to rewrite the moment of loss. It no longer holds pain. Why? Because you have changed. You are no longer the one who saw through the lens of lack. You are now the one who sees all things fulfilled. And in this place, the technique fades into the background. It becomes breath. It becomes being. You do not sit to revise. You walk in the constant knowing that every scene is already held in divine balance. You no longer need to reach for imagination. You are living from it. You are the Word made flesh, not waiting for change, but carrying it in your silence. You don't stop revising because it doesn't work. You stop needing to revise because your vision has been redeemed. You see through the eyes of the end, and from that height, everything is aligned, everything is useful, everything is love. This is the true freedom, when the inner world is so attuned to the wish fulfilled, so steeped in the awareness of the I Am, that outer things lose their grip. Delay loses its meaning. Reaction dissolves into rest. You no longer ask, should I revise this? You simply feel the truth, and the truth makes you free. And perhaps this is what the whole journey has been leading to, not mastery of the method, but the quiet birth of identity, the realization that you are not a mind seeking correction, you are not a past in need of healing, you are the one who sees rightly, and in that seeing, the whole world bows to serve the image you hold. So you rest, not in resignation, but in radiant assurance. You walk gently through the world, knowing that all is already well, that your fulfilled state has gone before you, preparing the way, that every scene has already been revised, not because you labored over each one, but because you have risen to the state in which no revision is needed. And now as that peace deepens and the breath grows slower, one final door begins to open in silence. What if there never was a technique, only remembrance? What if every step, the desire, the revision, the result, was simply the soul returning home to its original knowing, I am, and all that I assume is already mine?
And as that final door creaks open, the quiet recognition that perhaps there was never a technique, only remembrance, you begin to feel how close the truth has always been. Not something to reach for, not a tool to wield, but a stillness already present, already whole, already yours. It was never about the method. It was never about the practice. These were only bridges leading you back to the garden of your own being, where the fruit of assumption has always been ripe. You see now that revision was never the goal. It was the mirror, gently turned toward the self, so you could remember how to see. And once you remembered, the mirror dissolved. There is no technique in love. There is no effort in being. Only the effortless unfolding of what is already accepted as true. You are not healing your past. You are releasing the illusion that it ever held you. You are not fixing your present. You are allowing it to reflect the fullness of the state you now dwell in. The act of revision, once so important, becomes transparent. Like scaffolding falling away when the temple has risen, what remains is the presence that cannot be revised, the I am that needs no improvement. This is the mystery behind the mystery, that the one who seeks to revise is only dreaming of separation, and the one who remembers, I and my Father are one, awakens from the dream entirely, not by force, not by knowledge, but by rest, deep, sacred rest in the feeling of being that knows all is already done. This is the final revision, not of memories or relationships or events, but of identity itself. You no longer ask how to imagine. You no longer wait for the world to bend. You no longer measure time. You feel the end, and you are the end. You breathe it. You walk in it. You speak from it. And life responds because it must. This is why you can look upon your life and feel only gratitude. Even the things that once ached now shimmer with gold. Even the moments you thought you would erase, you now hold with tenderness, for they brought you here to this stillness, to this knowing, to this deep and holy unfolding. You see, nothing was wasted, not the delay, not the doubt, not even the forgetting. All of it taught you how to return. And now that you've returned, there is nothing left to fix, nothing left to seek, only the quiet joy of being the one who never left, only seemed to feel how different the world is now, not because it changed, but because you no longer require. You see from the mountaintop, you bless what is, you rest in what will be, you trust what was, for it was all your assumption, clothed in time. Even now the breath becomes lighter, the heart more open, and the space within you, once crowded by questions, is now filled with soft light. You are not a seeker, you are not a student, you are not someone applying a principle. You are the principle in expression. You are the law made visible. You are the word walking in flesh. And what you assume with conviction, the world must reflect with precision. So let the technique dissolve now. Let the need for effort dissolve. Let even the need for results fade into the background of this moment. What you assume, you become. What you feel, you form. What you remember, you reveal. And now that you remember who is doing the imagining, now that you've returned to the original place where there was nothing missing, a soft invitation begins to arise once more, delicate as mist upon the water. What if every scene, every soul, every whisper of desire still unspoken, is not something to revise, but something to behold, through the eyes of God within you, until only love remains? And as that final invitation whispers across the quiet landscape of your being, what if the highest act is not to revise, but to behold? You feel the shift from movement into stillness, from effort into presence, from rewriting into recognition. The moment you look through the eyes of God within, the desire to change begins to melt. You do not need to fix what is seen. When you see it rightly, you simply abide in the vision of truth, until all appearances yield to it. This is the subtle art of divine perception. It is not about adjusting the frame. It is about becoming the light. When you behold the scene in front of you, with eyes trained in assumption, trained in love, trained in the knowing of it is finished, the world reshapes itself, not through struggle, but through surrender. You see not what seems to be. You see what is, hidden beneath the veil of form. You behold the person before you, not as they were, or even as they are remembered, but as they are in spirit, whole and beloved. You behold the problem, not as resistance, but as the final echo of an old assumption that no longer lives in you. And because you have revised your identity, your seeing itself becomes redemptive. You no longer revise the image. You behold it into transformation. This is the moment when revision becomes reverence, when you no longer look at the world as clay to mold, but as light to awaken. Every face becomes a reflection of your consciousness. Every encounter becomes holy ground. The need to rearrange dissolves in the awareness that what you see is shaped by who you are, and who you are is the one who sees with divine memory. This is the fulfillment of the law, not to change the world by hand, but to reveal its hidden perfection by assumption, to look upon what was once called broken, and call it whole, to gaze upon lack and see only completion. Lift up your eyes and behold the fields, for they are white already to harvest. You do not need the outer world to catch up. You only need to stop placing it behind. You stop looking at life as a sequence of steps to get somewhere, and begin seeing it as a mirror of where you are now, and when you are living from the end, when your dwelling place is the fulfilled state, then even delay becomes evidence of unfolding. Even silence becomes proof that the answer has already been spoken in the language of feeling. So you sit with your memories, not to mend them, but to witness them through new eyes. You walk through today, not to revise it, but to regard it as already redeemed. You no longer hunt for problems to solve. You let your seeing become so saturated in love, so clear in conviction, that the world has no choice but to rise and meet your gaze. And what once felt like separation now reveals itself as the veil of perception lifting. Revision becomes beholding, beholding becomes remembrance, and remembrance becomes identity. You are the one who sees as God sees, and when you look upon your life from that holy vantage, you find that nothing needs to be rewritten, because everything already serves you, everything already flows from the end you now call home. You walk in the garden again, not as one banished from it, but as the very breath that gave it form. You do not erase the shadows, you shine until they vanish. You do not fear the illusion, you bless it until it bows. Your world, your past, your present, your unfolding, all of it moves in the rhythm of the self you now embody, and you no longer ask the world to change. You look through the eyes of the one who never needed it to, and as this seeing becomes your resting place, a quiet invitation stirs once more, not to go forward, but to go deeper. What if the world you once tried to revise was only ever asking you to remember? It was never separate, never outside, never apart from the light you now know yourself to be. And as that final remembering hovers in stillness, what if the world you tried to revise was never separate from the light you are? The last veil begins to grow thin, not with effort, not with seeking, but with the quiet presence of revelation. You no longer feel the urge to divide reality into what must be changed and what must be kept. You begin to see all of it as the outpicturing of one infinite light, taking form through your consciousness. You are not standing apart from life, shaping it with your thoughts. You are life itself, breathing through image, feeling, and form. You are the pulse of the river and the shape of the current. What seemed outside was never more than your own awareness, playing dress-up, assuming roles and patterns, until you remembered you were the author of every script. This is why revision works, not because you changed what happened, but because you withdrew your belief from the illusion that it ever held power over you. You touched the scene with new eyes. You looked upon it with the love that dissolves all fear, and in that gaze you reclaimed your dominion, not by control, not by repetition, but by remembrance. The world never asked to be corrected, it only longed to be seen rightly. And the moment you begin to see with the eye of I am, the moment you hold the world in the stillness of your fulfilled self, it rearranges, not as a reward, but as a mirror. There is no delay in the spirit, only reflection, and the reflection comes not when you perfect the technique, but when you become the state. To revise, then, is not to battle the shadows, it is to stand so rooted in the light of your chosen assumption, that the shadows vanish by default. You no longer seek to revise this or that moment. You walk as one who knows that the moment is already new, because you are new in it. This is the end of effort, and the beginning of true rest, the rest of the seventh day, the Sabbath of consciousness, where you cease from labor because it is done. You revise not because the world is wrong, but because you are right within. You choose again, you assume again, and the outer in perfect faithfulness responds again. Let there be light, said the word, and light appeared. The command was not shouted, it was assumed. And now you speak the same way. You don't beg the scene to shift. You say in your heart, let it be done according to my knowing, and it is. You do not strain. You see, you do not strive. You accept, and what you accept becomes. The more you rest in this state, the more you feel the world softening in your presence, not because it has changed its nature, but because your vision no longer feeds the false. You revise not because things went wrong. You revise because you've remembered your authority. And the more you remember, the less you need to change. For even the so-called imperfections become notes in a perfect song. Even the detours become sacred. Even the silence becomes holy ground. You bless the moments that once bruised you. You touch them with grace. You no longer fight to revise the past. You give it back to love. You let it return home to its source, your divine self, who always knew, always saw, always remained, and from this high place of seeing, a new invitation begins to rise, not as instruction, but as a whisper carried on the still waters of your own being. If all is one, and the world is your mirror, what happens when you no longer revise the reflection, but dwell entirely in the face of the one who never left the garden? What new world appears when you gaze only at the light, and let it unfold itself through you, without resistance, without question, without end? And as that gentle whisper moves through you, what world unfolds when you gaze only at the light? You feel the answer before the words can rise. It comes not in thought, but in sight, not as something you must create, but something already alive within you, waiting for your eyes to soften, your grip to loosen, your breath to slow. The world you have been trying to revise was never broken. It was only clothed in the garments of your former assumption, and now the light beneath the veil begins to shine through. You've spent so long trying to shape the outer scene, not realizing the scene was shaped by the seer. You believed the event needed changing, the past needed mending, the person needed correcting, but what needed changing was the eye, the inner lens, through which you beheld them. And now that lens, washed not by time, but by vision. This is the secret behind all creation, that nothing is fixed, not because you have power over the world, but because you are the world in seed form. You are the root of what appears. And when you revise not the outer condition, but the state of the one observing it, the whole world follows, not out of obligation, but because it was always yours to express. You were never meant to rearrange shadows. You were meant to embody the light so completely that the shadows vanished on their own. You were never meant to beg the mirror. You were meant to turn your face inward until the mirror caught up. This is why revision leads, ultimately, to stillness, because once you know that the world must reflect your assumption, you need not scramble to adjust it. You revise once in faith, and rest in knowing. You assume the end, and remain. The scene may linger, but your vision no longer wavers, and in that steadfast gaze, the new form appears. It may arrive subtly, through a shift in tone, a softened encounter, a coincidence so tender it moves the heart, or it may come suddenly, with the thunder of fulfillment. But no matter the speed or the shape, it comes, because it must. Thou wilt keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee. Peace is not the absence of contrast, it is the absence of resistance to your chosen state. And the more you remain in that state, the more the outer begins to feel like home. You begin to live in a rhythm of quiet assumption. You no longer need to rewrite the script with urgency. You become the still author, writing from the end, knowing each character and scene will fall into place, not because you control them, but because they rise to match your vision. And here, something sacred unfolds. You realize that the very desire to revise is itself a bridge, a signpost, a reminder from the fulfilled self pulling you closer to remembrance. You do not revise because something is wrong. You revise because something is wrong. You revise because something in you already knows what is true. You return to that knowing like breath returning to the body. You feel the desire, you assume its fulfillment, and you rest. You look again at the person, the moment, the memory, and you no longer react. You behold. You let the light in you meet the form outside you, and you say within yourself, this too is mine, and it is good. And what was hard becomes soft. What was stuck begins to move, not because you forced it, but because you loved it into new shape. You saw it with different eyes, and that seeing was the revision, that seeing was the redemption. So you move through your days differently. Now you revise inside, you revise with breath, you revise with presence, and your presence, bathed in assumption, becomes the blessing every scene responds to. And as this new world begins to reveal itself, not as a future, but as the echo of your own being made visible, one final whisper begins to take shape. What happens when you no longer look to imagination for change, but abide in it as your eternal home? What unfolds when you are the fulfilled state, walking quietly through a dream that has already bowed to your remembrance? And as that final whisper takes shape, what unfolds when you are the fulfilled state, walking quietly through a dream that has already bowed to your remembrance? A silence begins to swell within you, vast and tender, not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of completion. You feel no need to hurry, no impulse to adjust. The world continues its rhythm, but something in you is still, deeply still, because you know now, it is already done.
This is what it means to dwell in the end, not to imagine once and wait for proof, but to abide in the knowing that the inner scene is the only cause. You no longer use imagination to reach for what is not yet, you live from it, as the eternal home of every fulfilled desire. You revise, not to change the path, but to realign your gaze, and once your gaze is whole, the path reveals itself as perfect. You become like the one who wakes inside a dream, and no longer fears the unfolding. Every face you meet, every word spoken, every turn in the road feels like a familiar echo from the state you have already claimed. You are no longer at the mercy of appearances. You walk gently through them, knowing they must conform to what you have assumed within. There is no need to repeat, no need to wonder, no need to go back. You revise once in faith, and then remain. That is the full circle of mastery. You do not revise to fix, or to chase. You revise to rest. You correct the inner conversation, and live as though it never strayed. You change the past, not to deny it, but to align it with who you are now. And once aligned, it vanishes into light. This is the end of inner conflict, the end of trying to earn, the end of seeking outward what only consciousness can reveal. You revise, not just scenes, not just memory, but the very root of your identity. You revise the assumption that you were ever separate from the thing you desired, and in that act, the illusion of longing disappears. Desire was always memory, a whisper from the self already fulfilled. It did not come to make you suffer, it came to lead you home. And now that you dwell there in imagination, in knowing, in stillness, you realize the whole world was never against you. It was only reflecting the version of you that had not yet remembered. Now you remember. You are not the dreamer caught in a restless night. You are the one who wakes, the one who speaks the word, the one who revises from love and rests in truth. You are the operant power, not as concept, but as breath, as posture, as presence. You move through this dream world, not to control, not to test, but to express, to radiate the feeling of the end, to shine it so steadily, that even the most stubborn forms dissolve, and reshape in the warmth of your gaze. And when they don't, when the echo of the old still flickers, you do not flinch, you do not falter, you see it for what it is, the fading residue of a former state. You bless it and keep walking. You do not react, you revise with your stillness, you hold your center, and the outer must bow. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, not because the world has changed, but because you no longer stray from the dwelling place of the fulfilled self. You stay there, you eat there, you sleep there, you bless from there, and all that was once missing returns, not as reward, but as reflection. And now from this place of completion, one final truth begins to glow softly in the silence. What if the act of revision was never about changing what was, but awakening to the timeless truth, that nothing real was ever lost, and everything that matters was waiting for you in the end, right where you left it. And as that final glow whispers through you, what if nothing real was ever lost? You begin to sense the deeper current beneath all your revising. A soft revelation stirs in the silence. You were never correcting your life. You were retrieving your inheritance. You were never fixing the past. You were remembering the truth that was buried under the assumptions of fear and forgetfulness. Revision, then, is not a mental tool. It is a sacred unveiling. It is the peeling back of appearances until only love remains. What you revise is not the event, but your relationship to it. Not the facts, but the frame. And once the frame shifts, the facts must bend to meet it, because the world cannot outpicture what you do not first feel as real. The moment you claim the feeling of the fulfilled desire, you are no longer revising from longing, but from dominion. You stand where the story ends, and the end, once assumed, ripples backward through time, reshaping everything to match its tone. Like a stone dropped into still water, the vibration of your assumption touches every shore of memory, and what once brought pain now brings peace, not because it was changed, but because you no longer live there. You have moved. You have taken up residence in the state where it never went wrong, where you were always seen, always chosen, always safe, always whole. And this is not fantasy, it is the only reality there is, for consciousness is the root, and everything else is shadow. Your assumption is the seed, Your imagination is the womb, and what you persist in inwardly must bear fruit outwardly, even if the soil resists for a time. This is the quiet courage of living in the end, to dwell in what is not yet visible, and treat it as already done, to revise the scene not with desperation, but with knowing, to say in stillness, this is how it was, this is how it is, and nothing outside of me can argue otherwise. You stop rehearsing what was, you stop validating the wound, you stop waiting for the apology, the proof, the permission. You give yourself the only permission that matters, to imagine anew, and to abide in it without wavering. And even when the old story tries to rise, when a familiar feeling returns, or a voice echoes from the past, you no longer enter the fight, you simply return to the garden of your fulfilled state. You let the feeling of it is done become your answer to every appearance. You revise by resting, by remaining, by refusing to step out of the light you have chosen. Be still and know that I am God, not the God of effort, not the God of struggle, but the God who speaks worlds into being, through the silence of unwavering assumption. This is who you are when you revise rightly. You are not manipulating images, you are speaking from the mountaintop, and the valley hears you. From this height, all former memories are bathed in clarity. You see the pattern they once played. You recognize the assumption that called them forth. And now, because you are no longer the one who lived that story, they have no power. You hold them in your hand like seeds that were never watered, and you let them return to dust, not with regret, but with gratitude, because even they pointed the way home. And now that you're home, there is nothing left to resist, nothing left to revise, only the soft unfolding of a world shaped by the one who has remembered their name. You walk forward as if everything is conspiring for you, because it is. You breathe as if every breath affirms the truth of your state, because it does. And when others look confused, when the world seems slow to respond, you do not waver. You revise the moment with your stillness. You declare without sound, I know who I am, and therefore I know what is mine. And as this knowing deepens, something stirs even beyond the law itself. A sacred question, older than memory, begins to rise through the silence. What if revision was never about altering what was, but revealing that nothing can remain broken in the eyes of love? What if every scene, when looked upon with the fullness of I am, must bow, must bend, must bloom?
And as that question lingers, what if nothing can remain broken in the eyes of love? You feel the warmth of a truth too ancient to be taught, too near to be spoken. It does not arrive through thought, but through stillness. It spreads through the heart like morning light, slow and certain, touching every shadow with gold. You begin to see that revision is not correction at all. It is love remembering itself through time. Every moment you have ever wished to change, every word you wish had been said differently, every turning point you once cursed, all of it softens when you look again through the eye of love. And in that gaze the jagged becomes smooth, the broken mends itself. The past, so feared and rehearsed, becomes a vessel for grace. This is the mystery hidden in plain sight, that what you revise with love becomes part of your blessing. It does not disappear, it transforms. And in its transformation you are freed. You were never at war with your life. You were only asleep to its purpose. To revise is to awaken within the scene, not to escape it, not to deny it, but to redeem it. You enter the memory, yes, but now you carry the seed of a new meaning. You bring the awareness that sees rightly. You become as Joseph, who said you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. Not to justify what happened, but to see that your consciousness, once purified by love, can draw beauty from ashes. So you revisit the moment, not with pain but with promise. You no longer see it as a scar, you see it as soil, and in that soil, you plant a new assumption. You feel it, you accept it, and you let it grow in silence. You do not force it to bloom. You know the law will water it with perfect fidelity, because now you understand, the law does not discriminate, it does not judge, it simply mirrors. And when the mirror is met with unwavering love, it has no choice but to return the image of wholeness. You no longer need to ask, will this revision work? You no longer watch for signs. You know the sign is in the shift of your being. The proof is in the peace that follows. And peace, not reaction, becomes your new compass. From this peace you revise even before the moment unfolds. You prepare the scene in your heart, and walk into it clothed in the end. You assume the beauty, the harmony, the favor, and the moment, sensing its master bows to your command. Not a command shouted, but breathed. not from tension, but from trust. And when things still seem to go awry, when words stumble or tempers flare, you do not flinch. You close your eyes, and in the silence of your soul, you revise again. You revisit not the event, but the state. You climb back into the dwelling place of it is done, and from that high place, the scene rewrites itself. This is the quiet miracle of the law, that you can live a day, and by nightfall, rewrite its meaning. And that new meaning, once felt deeply, reshapes all tomorrows. For there is no permanence in the outer, there is only reflection, and reflection obeys the most dominant vibration, not the one acted out, but the one accepted within. So you begin to live gently. You revise often, but not in haste. You revise as a gardener tending sacred ground. You prune with love. You water with imagination. You speak to the roots with faith. And you wait not passively, but peacefully, for the fruit to ripen. And it always does. Sometimes in ways you could never predict. Sometimes through hands you never touched. But it comes, because it must. And now as the world begins to take shape around your revised inner world, another question stirs softly, like a ripple in still water. What if the final revision is not a scene, or a moment, but the self itself? What happens when you no longer revise for a better life, but for a truer identity, already complete, already eternal, already free? And as that question stirs the waters of your being, what if the final revision is the self itself? A sacred quiet enters. Not the quiet of absence, but of arrival. You feel something loosening in you, something you hadn't noticed you were holding. A layer of striving melts, and beneath it, there is only stillness. Not because you have finished the work, but because you have remembered you are not the worker. You are the Word. You are the Word made flesh, revising not to fix a life, but to awaken from the dream of fragmentation. All your efforts to change scenes were leading you here, to the one revision that changes everything, the self you believed you were. For what if it was never about adjusting events, but dissolving identities? What if the painful memory was not yours, but the echo of a state you no longer need? And what if the true act of revision is not looking back at a scene, but inward at the one who called it forth? This is the quiet unveiling of spiritual maturity. At first you revise the day, then you revise the pattern, but eventually, you are drawn to revise the self, not to become someone else, but to remember the one you've always been beneath the veil of assumptions. You revise the version of yourself who was abandoned. You revise the one who was rejected, who failed, who suffered, not by denying what was felt, but by allowing love to speak over it. You breathe upon the image with compassion. You say, that was not the truth of me. That was a mask I wore in forgetfulness. And just like that, the mask dissolves. You do not need to repair the character. You awaken to the author, and the author has no past, only presence. In this presence, you look at your life not as a timeline, but as a tapestry. And revision becomes the golden thread that rewrites the whole pattern with a single touch. You see yourself not as the one moving through events, but as the one dreaming them, and dreaming them well. Here, the law reveals its highest mercy, that no assumption is permanent. No version of you is final. You can step out of any identity, and put on the garment of the new man, as easily as a robe at dawn. Put ye on the Lord Jesus Christ. That is not a command to worship someone else, but to wear the consciousness of the fulfilled one. To clothe yourself in the knowing that all is done, all is yours, and all is within. This is the final act of revision, not the memory, not the event, but the eye that beheld them. You revise the self who doubted. You revise the one who begged. You revise the fearful, the hesitant, the small, and you step into the holy stillness of the one who simply knows that imagining creates, knows that assumption hardens into fact, knows that every version of you is only an echo of the state you inhabit. You are not trying to be worthy. You are revising into the truth that you already are. You do not have to undo what was believed. You only have to stop identifying with the one who believed it. This is the turning, the sacred reversal, when the dreamer stops fixing the dream and remembers he is dreaming, and in that remembrance, the entire dream bends to reflect the new dreamer. So now, when you revise, you do not struggle, you do not reach, you do not ask for what is already yours. You simply embody the one for whom that desire has always been reality, and you let that version of self be the only one you accept. And when you feel resistance, when the old self whispers, when the memory tightens, you meet it with compassion. You do not fight it. You say, that was a version of me, but I have revised it, and I remain where I belong. You breathe, you return, you rest. And as this new self takes form within your being, something vast and luminous begins to awaken. What happens when you revise so completely that there is nothing left to fix? Only the joy of unfolding what has already been made whole. And as that joy begins to stir, the joy not of becoming, but of revealing what already is, you start to feel the weight you've carried for lifetimes dissolve into light. You realize that the final revision is not an effort, not even a prayer, but a return, a soft return to the center of your being, where nothing ever needed to be earned, where no scene ever needed repair, where all was held from the beginning in perfect completion. This is the great mystery hidden beneath every technique, every practice, every whispered affirmation in the night, that all you sought to change was only asking to be seen through the eyes of your eternal self. You don't rewrite your life to control it. You rewrite your life to remember it, to remember the blueprint that was buried beneath fear, doubt and second-hand belief, to peel away the noise until only the pure tone of I am remains. That is the divine name spoken through you not as words, but as state. And that state holds the seed of every possible world. So you no longer look to the outer for evidence. You feel the inner shift, and you know the outer must bow. You no longer argue with appearances. You revise them silently with your identity. You stand as the one for whom the scene already went right. You dwell in the self for whom the desire is not a hope, but a memory. This is how the law of assumption moves from effort into embodiment. At first it feels like a discipline. You catch the thought, you revise the moment, you rehearse the better version, but eventually, something simpler dawns. You don't need to fix the moment, if the one being it has changed. You shift the identity, and the moments rewrite themselves to match. The self becomes the revision, and in that sacred becoming, you find rest. You no longer try to protect your new story. You are the new story. You do not anxiously revise each reaction, each comment, each outcome. You abide in the state of one who has already won, already risen, already received. And from this state, you move through the world gently, knowing that the mirror will not reflect your words, it will reflect your assumption. And what a relief it is to know that the world is not here to challenge you, but to serve you. It does not test your worthiness, it reflects your chosen identity with perfect precision, like a silent unjudging lover, who only answers, as you wish. So you choose again. You revise not from fear, but from delight. You revise not to escape, but to embrace. You revise not to create distance from what was, but to draw closer to what truly is. You may still remember the old story. You may still feel its echo on certain days, but you are no longer caught in its gravity. You float above it with the lightness of knowing that was never the real me. And when you revisit those scenes now, you enter not as the victim, but as the author. You hold the pen of assumption in your heart. You say, this time I am seen, this time I am chosen, this time I am safe. And because you feel it, not with striving, but with sincerity, it becomes so. You don't need to feel it perfectly. You only need to feel it truly. The law responds not to the volume of emotion, but to the authenticity of being. The outer will always catch up to the inner, and if it hasn't yet, it simply means you are still tuning your station. Stay there, rest there, persist in the frequency of the fulfilled self. For as surely as the seed becomes the tree, so too must your assumption bear fruit. And now, as the light of this remembering spreads through every corner of your inner world, a final curiosity begins to rise, not from the mind, but from the soul itself. If every past has been revised, and every self has been restored, then what remains but to live as the one who has already become? What does life feel like when revision becomes your way of seeing, not just your technique for changing? And as that question glows in the stillness, what does life feel like when revision becomes your way of seeing? You begin to notice that everything softens, not just your memories, but your gaze, not just your assumptions, but your breath. The very way you move through the hours becomes more like water, less like striving. You no longer chase after what you already contain. You no longer fight with what you now bless. Life becomes less of a journey, and more of an unfolding, of who you've always been beneath the noise. This is when revision stops being a momentary act, and becomes a constant perception, a sacred filter through which you see the world, not as it screams to be seen, but as it yearns to be loved. You see through the old shadows, with new eyes, and what once demanded fixing now reveals its hidden gift. The past becomes pliable in your hands, the present becomes radiant with quiet power, and the future, it bends willingly to the one who lives from the end. For when you have truly revised yourself,
The world no longer holds you hostage to what was. It begins to mirror back what is, what has always been yours in consciousness. You are no longer revising from separation, but from sovereignty. You are not asking the mirror to smile, so you may feel joy. You smile, and the mirror, faithful and silent, smiles back. To live like this is not to deny life's texture. It is to love it so deeply that even contrast becomes color, even delay becomes refinement, even pain becomes poetry. You realize the revision was never meant to erase the past, it was meant to redeem it, to restore it to harmony, in the only place that ever needed it, your inner state. You look back and see the thread of grace even in what felt like ruin. You reimagine not just how it went, but who you were in the midst of it. You change your place in the story, not with denial, but with divine authorship. And as you live from that new place, the entire story breathes differently. He restoreth my soul. That is not a promise reserved for the worthy, it is the law in action for the awakened. Restoration is not occasional, it is structural. Built into the very fabric of consciousness is this secret, that the moment you revise with love, the soul remembers wholeness, and the world reflects the remembering. So now you revise, not just in meditation, but in motion. You revise in your walk, in your smile, in your silence. You revise with your posture. You revise with your permission to receive. You revise with every breath that says, I am no longer who I was. I am who I have always been, whole, chosen, safe and free. The outer begins to align not in response to your effort, but in resonance with your essence. The more lightly you hold your assumptions, the more powerfully they manifest. The less you strive to fix the world, the more it bends to reflect your being. This is the gentle paradox of the law. When you stop trying to change the mirror, the reflection changes itself. You do not need more force. You need more fidelity, to the state, to the feeling, to the inner image of who you truly are. And when that fidelity becomes your habit, your resting place, then revision is no longer something you do. It is what you are. You are the one who assumes the best, and sees it take shape. You are the one who remembers the good even in what seemed lost. You are the one who walks through illusion, seeing only truth. And the truth is this: nothing is fixed, nothing is final, everything is fluid in the hands of the one who knows. And as this knowing deepens, not as a thought, but as a state, you begin to wonder, what else have I accepted as fixed, when it is only waiting to be rewritten by my inner eye? This quiet wonder opens a new door, not toward what you want to revise, but toward what you never dared to imagine possible at all. What if revision doesn't just change what was, but reveals what always has been, waiting behind the veil? And as that veil begins to shimmer, not with effort, but with expectancy, you feel a sacred invitation rise from within, not merely to revise the scene, but to unveil the unseen. You begin to wonder if revision was never meant to be an act of correction, but a key to revelation. Not a tool to fix the broken, but a light to uncover the eternal. What if you were not changing the past at all, but uncovering the buried gold beneath its mask? The moments that once felt like chains now feel like doors. The scenes that once tightened your chest now soften under the gaze of your awakened self. You no longer approach revision as a reaction to pain, but as a declaration of truth. You no longer ask, what happened, but what does love see here? And in that question, a world is reborn. You begin to sense that every memory holds a hidden seed, an image of divine completion waiting to be watered by your awareness. Not the awareness of the old self who felt helpless, but the new self who sees from the mountaintop, who knows that every shadow was cast only by the turning of your gaze away from light. So you turn, not in resistance, but in reverence. You look again, gently. You feel again, freely. But this time you do not stop at the surface. You do not bow before the facts. You move through the veil of appearances into the realm of assumption, where all things begin, and all things are made new. It is here that revision becomes revelation. And what is revealed is not a better version of the past, but a deeper truth of who you were within it. You begin to see that your assumptions did not just shape your experiences, they filtered your perception of the divine that was always present. And now with new eyes, you see it everywhere. In the conversation that once wounded you, you see the invitation to claim your voice. In the rejection that once stung, you see the call to remember your worth. In the lack you see the lesson that your source was never external. In the silence, you hear the whisper, I have never left you. This is the pearl of great price, the knowing that life never happened to you, but through you, and now from within you. And because it came from within, it can be revised from within, lovingly, effortlessly, completely. And once this truth is rooted in you, your revision no longer comes from urgency, it comes from overflow. You no longer wait for permission to feel whole, you feel it now. You no longer postpone joy until reality complies. You revise reality itself by entering joy. Your new assumption is not a hope, it is a home. And from this home you bless every memory, every mistake, every moment, not because they were perfect, but because you now see what they were pointing toward all along, the awakening of the operant power. You see the law is not neutral in the way most suppose. It is infinitely responsive to your self-conception. It takes no sides, but it does take shape, according to your inner word. And so when you revise, you are not negotiating with fate. You are declaring, this is the truth of me. This is the form I choose for the formless, and the formless obeys. The past rearranges, the future softens, the present becomes luminous with alignment, and you become light, not through effort, but through identity, not by pushing what was, but by holding what is, until it echoes through all time. So now as you lie in bed, or walk in silence, or close your eyes beneath a tree, you may find yourself smiling, not because everything has changed, but because you know it must. You feel the tide turn, not outside, but inside, and you trust the rhythm, the timing, the unseen movement of assumption becoming fact. You have seen behind the veil, and the veil has no power now. And still, something deeper begins to stir, a quiet realization, not about your past or your future, but about what has always been untouched. What if there is a version of you that never needed revision at all, because it has always remained in perfect union with the I Am? And that stirring, so quiet, so pure, begins to flood your being with a knowing beyond words, not a thought, not a belief, but a recognition so ancient and whole it brings tears without sadness, and stillness without effort. You feel it in your chest, behind your eyes, in the silence between your breaths. The self that was never wounded, never missed the mark, never forgot its origin in the divine. The self that never had to revise, because it never departed from the end. This is not a version of you. This is the truth of you, the one who has never moved from the fulfillment of the promise, the one who never descended into time, though it dreamed itself through centuries of memory, the one who does not use the law of assumption to fix the story, but to express the infinite completeness of God made visible. This is the I Am, behind all assumptions, the still, glowing center from which every state arises, and into which every state dissolves. And to this you now return, not by climbing, but by remembering, not by becoming, but by surrendering the veil. When you revise now, it is not to change the facts, but to align with this deeper knowing. You are no longer correcting the past, you are consecrating it. You are no longer adjusting the outer to please the inner. You are resting in the inner, and watching the outer reshape itself as testimony. And even now, as your mind slows and the heart settles, you understand something that was always waiting beneath the surface. You were never practicing revision. Revision was practicing you, calling you home, teaching you to see not through eyes, but through essence, to hear not with ears, but with spirit, to speak not in language, but in being. When you revise a moment now, you do so gently, from the throne of the fulfilled self. You let the old dissolve without resistance, and you let the new form not with striving, but with trust. Trust in the law, trust in the silence, trust in the love that called you back to your rightful seat, as the author of every moment. The old story no longer holds power, because you have become the Word made flesh, and the Word cannot be bound. So you rise each day, not to rewrite the world, but to walk in the world already rewritten. You listen, you smile, you imagine, and you live, not from reaction, but from resurrection. You speak your inner word, and the outer world complies. You lay your head down at night, not in regret, but in reverence, because you know now, no moment is wasted, no scene is beyond healing, no experience can outrun assumption when it is born of divine identity. And if ever again a shadow appears, an unwanted scene, a painful echo, a false self, there is no fear. You know what to do. You revise with presence. You see it again through the eyes of I am. You hold it in love until it dissolves back into the light from which all form arises. This is your inheritance. This is your birthright. To revise not from lack, but from union. To remember not just what happened, but who you are. To speak as the fulfilled one. To live from the end. And so as you drift into sleep or silence, or stillness, let this awareness deepen. There is nothing left to chase. No past left to fix. No future left to fear. The only task now is to remain. Remain in the state of the wish fulfilled. Remain in the knowing that the mirror can only reflect your assumption. Remain in the sacred truth that you are the operant power. And from this state, quiet, confident, unseen, all things shall be added unto you. Amen.